in terms of the role that the UK should play in the EU, just in a very few word answers, should it be more than it is now? Should we be having, in just a few words?
I don't think we should be scared of Europe. I think we could play a much more leading role in Europe. We've got a great track record at home on climate change,
great.
so let's take it across the world.
You want to go back to Adrian, to your point?
Yes, well, on the point about the role of the European President, I think Phil's right that they would have a key role to play in terms of international relations, and I think that's exactly why Tony Blair is the worst person possible to be President of the European Union, with the lack of credibility that he's got. In terms of having totally damaged relationships with large parts of the EU and large parts of the US who voted for Obama recently in terms of the Iraq War, it would be very bad for Britain for Tony Blair to be the person representing us and the EU as the first president.
OK, I'll give Chloe a chance to answer back as well, but any other comments at all this? I mean, should Blair play more of a role? Yes, this gentleman at the back here.
You all talk about how the European Union isn't perfect and you all put forward plans to reform it, but do you honestly believe that it can be reformed?
OK, thank you very much. Any other comments at all? Yeah, this gentleman just here.
Oh yeah, I mean, for what you're saying, you know, obviously you're suggesting the US can negotiate with the President of Europe, but on foreign policy, don't states negotiate with each other? And once you have someone negotiating with the President of Europe on foreign policy, isn't that just yet another step towards a European state?
One more comment, please. Just this gentleman at the front.
I just have concern about, obviously, the centralisation process that's going on, because it takes away power potentially from the individual states and the individuals within those states. And it seems like this new treaty is just a new word for the constitution they tried to pass, and it seems like they're just taking the power away from any of us from actually making a decision. How do you think that can be resolved, and do you think the EU is an actual potential solution to this problem?
OK, we'll have to end it very soon, but Chloe, if you want to be brief, and then we'll very briefly go back to you.
I'm actually in almost complete agreement with the result of these 3 points that have just been made, which is to say that I do have very great fears about power going away and away and away from people, whether that means, you know, power from us about how we manage local council affairs or how we manage European affairs. I think in all cases of our political system we have that problem reflecting back at us. And I share your concern absolutely on foreign affairs. We invest power into our state leaders to do that job for us. In Britain, we have not invested that power in a European leader to do that job for us because we have not had that referendum. Now, whether we agree or disagree on the ins and outs of that, we haven't had it. It's not legitimate without that. So I very strongly agree with you, sir, on that. And then finally, following from that point, I don't think we can reform the thing. It is a bloated behemoth that does cause us to ask questions about pounds in and pounds out. In an age of future austerity on public spending, we do need to be careful about that. There's no point glossing over that. So, therefore, I do come from all those points and say we do need to be sceptical about the role. Can we even afford another presidential role with as many embassies as you like around the world, rather than saying who should be in it? OK, and Phil, very briefly, because we have to move on, there's just a few sentences.
I mean, actually, the reforms in the treaty actually give more powers back to domestic governments. You know, this president will be appointed and a representative of domestic governments, not of the parliament. And actually, that means it will be absolutely democratically accountable back to you, the voters. OK, great. Moving on to our next question, and this comes from a lady called Natasha Ross. Natasha?
How should the main parties tackle the BNP?
How should the main parties tackle the BNP? We'll start with Phil on this occasion. Phil?
We defeat them in debate, I'm afraid, and I have absolutely no truck, I'm afraid, with a sort of no platform policy, and I know it's very popular among some people. I know you've had heated debates here in recent years about it. I think it was absolutely right that the BBC invited the BNP onto Question Time, and I thought the results spoke for themselves. I think it's a slight shame that there was an implication that he was sort of ganged up upon by the audience. They should have done a more normal Question Time where he was exposed on a lot of other issues where we would have found he had no policies at all. That would be the way to really expose them. But in any case, even with its imperfections, I think it was right. And it really did expose the racist bigot that he is. And I think a lot of people who vote BNP are not racist. They're disaffected, and they don't think we've done enough on some issues that really matter to them, whether it's housing quality or whatever. And when they see the BNP in primetime television and realise it's a nasty racist party, I think it will help us make our case on the doorstep against them.
So when you say you're in favour of them appearing on Question Time, what do you have to say about those who claim that it gave him the sympathy vote? And actually, he looked quite annihilated in the sense that the whole programme is dedicated to his annihilation in terms of as a panellist.
Yeah, I mean, there has been some polling done since then, and if you read below the headlines on it. Peter Kellner did some interesting stuff on it this week. They haven't benefited from it at all. I actually think it would have been better to handle the programme slightly differently. They should have done a more traditional type of question time where he was asked about a range of policy issues, not make every single one on race or BNP, internal policy or whatever. I think that would have exposed him more. But no, I think he came across as an absolute imbecile, and I think it cannot possibly have helped. People don't like voting for people who are clearly totally stupid and out of touch with their own country. And I actually think that will not have helped him whatsoever.
What do the audience think on that? Any comments at all on the BNP? Yes.
You say that the BNP thrive on the fact that people are disaffected, but the reason they're disaffected is because the Labour Party have distanced themselves from the working class people. They've back in 1997, 1994 they dropped Clause 4, and now they're completely under Blair. They've completely distanced themselves from working class people. They don't know who represent them. They don't know why the Labour Party is relevant to them, and the BNP exploit this. So you say if they're disaffected, it's your fault and the fault of the main three parties.
Thank you very much. Any other comments at all? Any other comments? We'll go to Chloe next. Chloe.
Oh, yeah, I also think actually it was the right thing to do to have Nick Griffin out in the public in that sense for some of the same reasons as Phil. I think it's important to shine a light on the man's views. I think he showed himself up good and proper. I think there wasn't a person who watched that programme who didn't come away disgusted at his views, not only at the just the pettiness and the inconsistency of what he said, but the very, very serious substance of what he said. To be able to try and answer, about the Holocaust, that I have not been convicted of Holocaust denial is ludicrous and insulting and deeply, deeply disgusting. So I think it was a good thing to have brought that out. I think in some ways it was also a positive thing to have a if you like, a focus session on that, because it did give people a chance to really go deeply into the issue. You look at an average question time, perhaps actually this is even one example. We have only about 5 or 10 minutes to go into each issue, and to go into that in more depth on a very serious thing was quite positive. Finally, just on political disaffection, just to take on the gentleman's point at the end there, I think there's a lot of truth in what you say. The reason the BNP have grown up is because their supporters don't see another place for their views. There's a couple of statistics that are relevant to quote, I think there actually. In the last 12 years, if you look back at the beginning of the last 12 years, in fact, before even Mr Blair's days, there wasn't a single BNP councillor. It's a relatively recent phenomenon for them to have actually grown up and taken democratic power. We've got to look very, very seriously at that in the next 12 years and bring that back.
Okay, thank you. Adrian.
Well, I agree that I think Nick Griffin was exposed on question time, and I think we do need to take on the BNP in terms of its ideas, and when we do that, I think it will be clear that people will see that sometimes it's not clear what it's saying, and sometimes the logical consequences of what it's saying are truly terrifying and truly fundamental, the basic freedoms which almost everybody in the country would sign up to. But I agree with the questioner in the audience. I think that we've got to look at the causes of the problem, the reasons why people in some parts of the country are turning to the BNP. And I think it is because we've seen Labour neglecting its traditional supporters, moving away from what Labour traditionally stood for, and that we see very little difference between the three big parties in Parliament at the moment. We need to be listening to the concerns that people have, particularly in working class areas. And in all the canvassing that I do in my prospective constituency in Norwich South, in wards in Norwich where Green councillors represent, people are concerned about getting jobs, they're concerned about access to low-cost housing. And what have we seen done on this? Well, we've seen the Conservatives effectively stopping councils building their own council housing when they were in government. Labour's not reversed that. We still need to see more council homes built. But we also need to see the creation of new jobs. And why is it that people, especially people who are not academically minded, whose skills are in vocational areas, are not able to get jobs? It's because the British economy has been totally undermined in recent years, as we've seen British manufacturing
Okay, let's not go into the
decline.
economy too much at this stage.
But it's very relevant because it's about how you create jobs. And you can create jobs in green industries, things like solar power, public transport, as other European countries are doing, but we're not. So we've got to tackle the causes, and one of them is lack of jobs in British manufacturing.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. Any comments on that at all before we move on? Any other comments? Can we go back to the question actually? Natasha, what are your thoughts on how the parties should tackle the BNP? Can we ask you?
I agree with the panel that you have to defeat them through debate. I don't necessarily agree that question time was the right way to do it. And I don't think that they really had an informed debate. They just kind of baited him. I mean, like, as noble objectives of trying to prove him wrong, but I don't think it was the right way to do it.